Right, today, we're going to be talking about this week's stuff. Uh, but before we get into that, you guys have any interesting stories from your weekend?
It was my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Anybody else? We went to, oh, of course, I can't remember what it is now. Oh, Pine Valley. That w- it's amazing that that is only just a few minutes outside of St. George, because the environment is so completely different. It was very nice. What I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about the last module, the previous module, and then we're going to visit a bit about line and shape, which are two of the seven elements of anybody?
Art.
Yes, very good. Big gold star stapled to the middle of your forehead. Excellent work. We're also going to be talking about geometry, symbols, proportion, and orthogons. And we're going to be talking a little bit about string lamps. But before we get into that, are you guys having any difficulty with the previous assignment? You guys get
Yeah, I don't. For the collage, I'm kind of confused. Is it just like random pictures on a collage, or does it have to like symbolize something or mean something? Or
You can do it a number of different ways. You can approach it from a number of different ways. Do you know who the children's book illustrator Eric Carle is? Look up Hungry Caterpillar. Okay, what he did, he would make a bunch of paintings to get different textures. Then he would tear those up and use those as a collage elements. And each of those textured, colored areas would be portions of an image. There's Betty Sar, Betty Sar, who's one of my favorite artists ever. She would take images out of things like postcards, greeting cards, advertising. You know, from the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. She would cut those up and use those elements as well, and they would be discrete elements. The difference is Eric Carle would generate texture areas, and he'd use that to patch things up for his collages. And Betty, what she would do was take discrete elements and put those in her collages. So what you could do is find images of, for example, hair or hide or leather, and use pieces that you tear up of that to make the shape of the horse. Or you could look online for different equestrian riders, like jockey helmet, jockeys wearing helmets, or jockeys without helmets, and use that as the head. Or maybe even tear off the helmet of one and put it over the head of another to get your face. And I mentioned using magazines, but I also mentioned using Wikimedia. One of the nice things about finding images online is before you print them out, you can change the shape so they approximate the size, or you can change the size of the image so that when you print them out to tear them up, they approximate the right size and shape of the head that you need, for example. So you could do this either where you're developing the image with textures of, photos of different textures, or you can develop the image where you cut uh, different elements of completed pictures up and use those. Like I think one of you talked about using somebody's hand or arm that a roommate drew. And do you remember which of you said that? Okay, but and that's a really interesting idea. Using that for one of the arms, and maybe for the other arm you use something from a catalog. And so there's lots of different ways to go. Maybe for the background, you find photographs of different uh, golf clubs from around the country, or not golf clubs, but golfing greens from around the country, or maybe images of forests or prairie, or different things like that. Or fan art for Lord of the Rings, and tear that up. Or maybe your whole thing. Do you know who James Christensen is, the painter? One of his paintings is called Low Tech. So look that up. James C. Christensen painting is Low Tech. And what he did is he made a collage, basically. He developed a spaceship just from junk he found in his basement. So there's an egg beater for the engines. There's an old circuit board from a smushed up radio and he kind of collaged that together. And then after he made the collage, he did the painting. So there's lots of different kinds of ideas. Maybe your equestrian rider is Darth Vader on some spaceships that are pieced together. And that would be totally fine too. Kendall, did that answer your question at all? Okay. Any other questions? All right. Line and shape are both pretty important elements of art. And there's lots of different kinds of lines. What kind of lines do you think of for something that's calm? Or let's try, what kind of a line would you use to make something that's angry?
Pointed line. Wait, not a pointed line. Sharp edge. I don't know.
Zigzag.
Yeah, pointed. What's that?
Zigzag.
Yeah, pointed, zigzag, sharp edges. Exactly. How about for something that's soft and cuddly?
Squiggles.
Okay, yeah, squiggles. What about something that's incredibly calm? That leads into lines have energy. What do you think, what kind of shape of line or what direction of line do you think would generate the idea of calm or stillness?
Horizontal.
Right, horizontal. Very good. When water is still, is it horizontal or vertical?
Horizontal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where that idea comes from. Horizontal water, horizontal lines, they're very calm. There's no more energy left in it. How about vertical line? Does that have more energy? Yeah, absolutely. What has the most energy? Vertical, horizontal, or diagonal? Which line actually feels like it's moving? Because vertical is like a lamppost. Horizontal is like water. What's left?
Diagonal.
Yeah, diagonal. Because if we have a vertical line, it is ready to move. Diagonal is in the process of moving, and horizontal is it's all done moving. What are different kinds of lines? Can we generate lines? What kinds of things can you use to make lines?
A ruler.
So you can make a very straight line. What kind of mark making could you do?
Do you mean like dotted?
I mean, what kind of tool would you use to make the line?
A pencil?
A pencil, good. What else?
A marker?
Good. Somebody's not Kendall. How about Casey or Leah? What other kind of tool could you use to make a line?
A crayon.
A crayon, good. What kind of crayon?
Blue one.
I was thinking like a sharp or a dull, or you could also make it with the side of a crayon. Have you ever made a rubbing of like a tombstone? The line that you make with that, you use the whole length of the crayon at once. What other kind of material could you use? You could burn the end of the stick and use that. You could use the end of a stick in like mud or dirt. What else?
Chalk.
Have you guys ever used sparklers? Have you ever written your name with a sparkler? So you're basically using the scarring on your retina to make the line. Because that line that you see when you draw your name is that bright light scarring your retina. So that's one way to do it. Can you think of any others? Vice, look behind over Kendall's shoulder on all those images on the wall of all those pictures on the wall.
Those are Bree's artwork.
Now, if we look at those pictures, could you turn back? If we look at those pictures, do you see a line out of around each of the 4 pieces of paper? How is that line made? Is it drawn? There's one line that's drawn at the bottom, but what about the others? The line is there. We can clearly see it. How is it made? It's made because the 2 pieces of paper are next to each other, and you see the difference of the paper, or you see the difference of the paper in the wall. So the line isn't made any other way than that it's there because the shape has ended. So that's another way of making a line. Now, in the previous class, somebody had a picture of a slot canyon and a photo of a slot canyon. And in that, there were some very definite lines, and the lines were generated because of the dark strata lines between different kinds of stone. Have you seen some of the rock walls around St. George in just the landscape? You have different sediment on different layers of rock, and you see the lines that way. But you can also see like over your shoulders in the background, like over Megan's shoulder, you see where those 2 wall edges come together. That's a line there, the corner of the room. Where the top edge of the couch ends and the wall begins, that's a line there. Now, here's another question. Where's the negative line and where's the positive line? The couch is the positive line, or is a positive side of the line. That's positive space. And then this blank area around the couch is a negative space. So that line on the top edge of the couch is generated because the shape of the couch ends and the negative space, a negative shape of the wall begins. Can you see that? Leah has the same kind of thing going on. And that ceiling fan is just making me motion sick because of the pulsing light. Don't change it or anything, but but you see where the walls come and impact against where the ceiling is, just right at Leah's head? That's making lines too. But did somebody actually draw those lines in her apartment? I sure hope not. They would lose their deposit. No, it's because the shadows are there and you have different shapes coming together. So lines are made when we do a purposeful mark, or they're made when one shape ends, like that top of the couch, or they're made like the wall and the ceiling behind Leah, where 2 shapes come together. How many different kinds of line do you think there are? If we factor in all the ways the lines are made, like over Casey's shoulder, you see the millwork in that building and the grill above her head. Those are making lines too. And that's a constructed line as an artifact of architecture. So if we wanted to count all the different kinds of lines just in the images that we see, it would be absurd because there's literally countless. I don't know how you could define each of the kinds of line, but we're getting kind of an idea of what lines there are that we can see. And if we can point at something, we can tell whether or not it's a line. Now, how could you define a shape? What's an easy way of defining a shape? I will say an area limited by a line. Does it matter what kind of line? No. Now, one line that we didn't talk about is, Leah, could you point to something on the other side of the camera? so we can see your finger. Okay, perfect. What did Leah just make? That's another kind of line. That's an implied line where your eye, you don't have to keep pointing, thank you, where your eye is following the direction of her finger. So that's a line that doesn't delineate a shape at all, but it's a line that still exists, isn't it? And each of us can see those lines when we communicate. That's a big part of communication because we are paying attention to Kendall staring at her fingers and her hair. We are looking at the implied line that goes between her pupil and whatever she's focused on. So that's several different kinds. Now, what kinds of shapes are there? If there's too many lines to count, do you think there's too many shapes to count? Definitely. And we can, if shapes are areas that are confined by lines, then we can look around and just in the images that we see, a shape would be maybe your silhouette, maybe your face, your chin, your cheekbones, where your hair is defined. That's a shape. The areas behind you that are delineated by the different forms that we see in the rooms, those are all shapes. Some shapes are positive. What's a positive shape? If we look at Megan's couch, that's a positive shape. A positive shape is something that's there. What's a negative shape? Yeah, the area on the that's not the couch. It's the stuff that's not there, and they are just as important. If there wasn't a negative shape behind that couch, would you be able to see the line of the couch's edge? There's really no way to, is there? I think looking behind Leah, you can also see the positive shape of the walls and the ceiling, and it opens up into, is that a corridor behind you? Or is that another wall?
That
Because, yeah,
closet.
it's a closet. Because it looks like the dark wall that closet is in the center of almost becomes a negative space compared to the whiteness of the closet door, the walls, and the ceiling. It's a little bit different way of looking at the world, isn't it? Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about geometry, symbols, proportion, and orthogons. We're going to go kind of backwards. Does anybody know what orthogons are? That is the name of a shape that's used to kind of define the layout of an image. If we look at Casey, her background, and you see how those lines on the millwork behind her on the wall, they go up behind her and they kind of converge a little bit. You can see some perspective going on. Those triangles that are being defined, those are orthogons. And the orthogons are those kinds of shapes that we aren't even aware that we see, but we use them all the time to be able to tell where we sit in space, for example, and how things should feel when they're balanced. For example, have you ever stood on a railroad track and looked at the distance, and the railroad track goes into a tiny, long, thin triangle? And you look at the landscape on either side, and maybe there's some telephone poles, but those telephone poles get smaller and closer together until they shrink and end up in a triangle that shares a point with the railroad tracks. Have you ever seen that? Or standing on a road? The triangles that help your brain to perceive that as perspective are the shapes that are called orthogons. And we will talk about orthogons that help us lay out something so it feels like it's balanced, or help us to feel comfortable with the painting that we see, and help us to figure out why the artist placed different things in different areas of the paintings. And the orthogons that we're going to be working with are primarily going to be rectangles and their diagonals. And we'll talk about more about that either next week or the week after. What are proportions? Another word for this is ratio. Have any of you heard of the golden section ratio? The golden section ratio is a ratio that the Pythagoreans defined pretty well and that the Greeks used in their human sculpture.
Isn't it like 1 to 1.618 and then 1 to 0.618?
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's a couple reasons that that's very interesting. One is if everybody puts their face so that it's fully in the screen and you're looking straight ahead, your face, pull back just a little bit, Kendall. Yeah, your face makes a rectangle. It's an oval within a rectangle. And that rectangle is pretty much a golden section. And if somebody wants to hold up their hand so that the back of their hand is towards the camera so we can see their fingers. Okay, that's good. Now, if you look at Megan's hand, see the first knuckle next to her thumb, that's right next to her palm, to that first knuckle on her finger. If you can imagine how long that is, you say that that's maybe, let's say that that's unit 1. And then from that first knuckle to the second knuckle is going to be about 0.618. And if you go to that second knuckle or phalange, the ratio of that phalange to the end phalange is going to be about 1 to 0.618 as well. And Megan, if you can put your fingers together. Yeah, that is going, if we go to the width from the knuckle of the base of her thumb to the outside edge of her palm, up to about the ends of 2 of her fingers, that is about a golden section rectangle as well. All right, that's good. You definitely have a future as a hand model. I would say keep working out because your definition is definitely there. But
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. Have you heard of the mathematician named Fibonacci? He was an Italian mathematician. One of the things he noticed was that the natural world abounds with expressions of this kind of proportion. And what he did, instead of writing it as 1 to 1.618, like Kendall said, or 1 to 0.618, he wrote it as whole numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and it keeps going. What's interesting about that is that describes the ratio of the proportions of a leaf, for example, but it also describes the branching of veins in a leaf, or the spiral of seeds in a sunflower, or how tendrils in a root branch out. And pretty much every plant, every animal has these kinds of ratios throughout. Even our DNA. Our DNA is a double helix. It has pentagonal symmetry to it. And the pentagon, a perfect pentagon, is the golden section ratio folded in on itself. So our DNA shows that golden section ratio. And there's a lot more to it as well, but that goes, it's everywhere. And that's one of the things that I think we're built with, so that when we see somebody's art or our own and it feels out of balance, one of the reasons why it feels out of balance is because it doesn't fit in those orthogon placements or the golden section ratio. Is that a bad thing? No, it isn't. Not if you're controlling it. But if you're trying to make it feel balanced, that's one of the tools that you can use to help you determine what you need to tweak or change so that it works for you. Another thing, geometry. We're not going to be doing any math geometry. We're actually going to be doing exercises with a compass and a straight edge. But geometry is, have you guys heard of Vitruvius? Or maybe the phrase Vitruvian man? There's the famous Da Vinci drawing where there's a guy with 4 arms and 4 legs. Vitruvius was an architect, a Roman architect, who realized that if we live in buildings, not only should the proportion of the building suit our needs, but also he felt that the building's proportions should be a macrocosm or reflect human proportions. So if we look above a door, like those two sets of doors over Leah's shoulders, the area above the door that displaces the weight of the ceiling or the weight of the roof so that the door doesn't collapse, that horizontal beam is called a header. And underneath the floor, there's a bunch of pylons and supports to distribute the weight of the floor and the rest of the house into the ground, and those are called footings. But that's because of Vitruvius's influence and his thought that proportions of architecture should somewhat mimic or respond to the proportions of the human form. All that is based on geometry. If you does anybody have a sheet of paper you can hold up, like notebook? All right, that is what's interesting about this. What Megan is holding up, that rectangle is the golden section. That's a very good, close approximation of it, 8.5 by 11. Excellent, thank you. And that's all geometry. We're going to talk about how to make stars and different things like that using a compass and a straight edge. Now, I also wanted to mention symbols. Symbols are lines that are used to create shapes where the shapes become something holding a lot more meaning than just the squiggly lines could suggest or would communicate. If we look up above Kendall's shoulder and see those trees, now we can tell those are trees, can't we? Did everybody get that those are trees? They may not be rendered photographically accurate, but we still see them as trees. Does anybody know why? Because we're trained to see those as symbols of trees. We have that green triangle shape, and we have the brown rectangle shape underneath, and that makes a very good symbol of a tree. And she's able to show that, not using an awful lot of information. We know exactly what it is, don't we? All right, thank you, Kendall. That's perfect. If we look at Megan's shirt, the top of her shirt, see those 8, there's 10 symbols there. Well, 12 symbols. What are the 12 symbols? 10 of them are letters, and they communicate an awful lot more than just line, don't they? Because each letter represents a sound, and all the letters together represent an idea or a thing. And then the 2 other symbols are those the flowers. They aren't rendered photographically, but that doesn't matter. We still read them as flowers because they're symbols. So all these things that we've talked about, and that the wall that Megan is leaning on is an excellent example of use of line as well in a constructed space. But so all these things that we're talking about are lines and shape used in the world around us. Now, when we talk the string lamps, originally the project was going to be for 5 of those string lamps, but talking to several of you, I realized that they're taking longer than I had thought they would. So I changed that requirement. You only have to do 3 string lamps. But those string lamps, there's 3 things that are very important about them. One is they all need to be about that size. So 8 inches to 12 inches in diameter, balls about that size. And you can get balloons from Walmart or Dollar Tree. I want to ask, something happened the last couple of months that made me feel personally rather betrayed. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but have you noticed that Dollar Tree has raised their prices so everything is now $1.25? I know that Megan had the exact same expression I did. I couldn't believe it. I think they should change their name to $1.25 Tree. I feel let down. Like
I feel betrayed too.
Yeah, like a friend handed me a cup of punch that they spit in. You know, I don't like. I feel dirty. I don't like it. But anyway, you can get balloons at Dollar Tree or Walmart that you can blow up and get about a ball about that shape. Okay, that's what we're looking at. And you'll need to make 3 of them. So the first thing is the size. The second is two different kinds of line. And we talked about several different kinds of line. And you can do something. Can you see this? Nope, sorry. Where I have two horizontal lines across the center and jagged lines there. Those the videos all showed people making longitudinal lines, wrapping the balloon or the ball with string going all the way around it from different angles. And I would say do that. Do that, get a really good ball, solid ball like that. And then after it dries, go back around it and make a couple horizontal bands where you can do the jagged lines. And then you can get your two lines in it. Or make a big smiley face with fangs. Or a frowny face with fangs. But get both of those lines in there. And then the third important part is that you need to use at least two different colors. And you can do one color where you wrap the whole thing up and make those jaggedy lines or tight curlicue lines around it, and then do another set of stripes with a different color. Or you can mix it different ways. It doesn't really matter. I've seen them before where somebody will do kind of a really dense layer right around the balloon of a dark color, and then a lighter color that they just wrap really loosely around that. So it looks like the inner layer is almost a shadow, and that can look really interesting too. So those are the three most important parts: that the size is correct, that you use two different kinds of line, and that you use two different colors. So and you can get the colors by soaking white string and glue that you put food dye in if you want to. If you decide to do that, I definitely get gloves you're going to throw away afterwards, because otherwise your hands are going to be dirty for a while, or they'll be stained for a while. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, on the quiz, I'm putting the quiz at the end of everything. I have had some people say, hey, the assignments are locked. They were locked because the person didn't open all the pages in the module. You need to open all the pages in the module before you can do the assignments. And one of the reasons is you go through the stuff that helps you do so you can do the assignment better. And yeah, I've had some people turn in assignments, not in this class, thankfully, that what they turned in had very little relationship to the directions. And it was because they just got the assignment by itself, did it without looking at anything else, and then turned it in. And that doesn't help. But the quiz, two of the questions on the quiz, one asks about the definition of line, and one asks about the proportion of the golden section rectangle. So, and everything else is also in the module as well. Well, if you guys are good with everything and you don't have any other questions, then that's all I have. And we can see each other next week. You guys good?
Bye.
All right, we'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.